Feel the waves cut through me, hypnotized by the sounds I'm breathing in. Hold tight, chemicals collide. Hold tight, hold tight, hold tight. Dripping lights paint the skies, all because of you. Dripping lights paint the skies, only you can make me move. You can make me move.
Welcome to Observer of Anomalous Objects. I'm Dale, and I truly appreciate you tuning in. You can also follow me on Spotify, TikTok, and Instagram. Just search for Observer of Anomalous Objects. You can also find me on X at DaleRob62. If you haven't done it yet, please hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and share it with others who are passionate about the unknown. And make sure that you tap the notification bell so that you'll never miss an episode. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Stanley Milford Jr., the Paranormal Ranger himself. Let's get into it.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question,
Sure.
and it comes out of from watching the series, The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
I noticed that a lot of First Nation people or Native Americans, they will not use the word skinwalker. And so why is this taboo so strong in Native American culture? Will they use the English word skinwalker, but not the Native American word for it? Is that how it works? Or will they not use it? A lot of them, period.
For the Navajo, the word skinwalker is closely attached to that culture. When the term skinwalker comes up, there is that association to the Navajo culture and Dene culture. Dene is the term used by originally by the Navajo people. That's what they refer to, as opposed to Navajo, which is a term that was given by Spaniards of the Navajo. So because this is viewed as a part of the witchcraft or black use of black magic, so to speak, there's an understanding that these things are capable of working within other dimensions, other space and time that's overlapping to our physical world that you and I are in right now at this moment. But many times simply saying that word, I avoid saying that word, after dark, simply because I don't want these energies and entities focusing in on me and on, the fact that I said that word, and
Is that
so
like
I think
inviting them? Is that like inviting them
yes,
in?
it is very much so.
Okay.
So I think with the Navajos are very utilitarian. It comes out of a need. Let's say if you look at the Navajo back in the 40s and 50s and even before then, out on the Navajo Reservation, you had few hospitals. Today, there's a taboo with snakes, and especially, rattlesnakes. I think that was out of, simply on the Navajo Reservation. If you got bit by a rattlesnake out in the middle of nowhere, it could be a life-threatening situation. So the culture kind of built that taboo and against snakes for that very reason. So the same with the witchcraft. Typically in the 40s and 50s, Navajos, after dark, they were in the hogan. The door was shut, and you were in for the evening. You weren't out venturing around unless there was a really serious need to be out there, because out there in the darkness is where witches and shapeshifters and all of that's where they were doing their work. So you were inside and confined to indoors early on, and I think that was for a reason. So
And so I'm really excited. Let's go ahead and move into the UFO situation. Now, you had mentioned seeing the one that was doing the zigzag. We called it the eat my dust one. At least that's what I labeled it. Let's talk about how does the Navajo community view UFO sightings compared to non-native communities? We know what the mentality here. I don't want to say West, but kind of in the non-native communities where there's a lot of skepticism. We've been taught our entire lives that we're it, that we're the alpha species, that we are the pinnacle of creation. Is it a different look for the Navajo Nation or even the Cherokee Nation? I want to say this before you answer that. I think you answered a question for me. There's always been a debate about whether my grandmother was Cherokee or some other tribe. But you mentioned Oklahoma being the center of the Cherokee Nation, at least part of it, and that's where my grandmother grew up. So you may have solved a mystery for me, Stanley. But having said that, can you go ahead and tell us kind of what's the difference between how your culture, the Navajo culture, and the non Native American culture, how you guys view UFO sightings versus how we view them?
with many indigenous peoples and many Native American tribes and First Nations people, many of them have what is referred to as an emergent story or creation story. I mean, technically, if you look at the Bible and you look at Adam and Eve, there is a creation story there. But within the Navajo creation story, there's references to coming into this physical world that you and I are in as the shining world is what it's referred to in Navajo, and or the glittering world, coming through sometimes four, and depending on the source, five different worlds. John and I have come to associate that with dimensions, essentially coming into our physical world from other dimensions. With the Navajo creation story, there are these worlds where there are other beings there that are referenced, that are sometimes closely associated with animal species, but capable of communicating like man does. In that, you have some cultures that talk about and refer to star people, the Hopis and the Zunis have their references to the Kachinas, which are viewed as sometimes as gods and or people from the heavens or star people. It's interwoven in these cultures. The other thing you have in this particular region of the Southwest, where you have these previous cultures like the Fremont people and basket maker periods of people and cultures, where you have pictographs and petroglyphs, hundreds, if not sometimes probably thousands of years old, on these cave or in canyon walls and caves and structures like that in this particular region and other places around the globe too. But because of these, there are depictions of things that could be interpreted as star people and craft, and even, I dare say, things like the Bigfoot, other beings and entities that can be connected to paranormal phenomena. So it's interwoven in these cultures.
That's why I was going to use the word ingrained, that it's a cultural concept and it follows the history, of the Navajo people. And that would probably relate to a lot of other First Nation people as well. Although I know probably last year sometime I was talking to someone who was very, very involved in their culture, and I was surprised that they didn't have a concept of sky people. And so I guess it's not every Native American tribe or First Nation people, that there are some that don't have that concept.
I would, given the number of indigenous peoples around the globe, yeah, you're gonna have both. You're gonna have both versions and interpretations. The other thing is the interpretation. I mean, you and I might go out to Canyon de Chelly, which is in the heart of the Navajo Reservation, and walk among those pictographs and petroglyphs. You and I might be looking at a particular image that's there on those walls and have completely different interpretations of that. I mean, archaeologists today have different interpretations of those images, but there are some that are very compelling and look very similar to what we see today as far as UFOs, similar to what you have with some of the Egyptian hieroglyphic images, that appear to be things like helicopters and other craft that we are familiar with today, and
Right.
it's
And
left
stuff.
up to your interpretation.
One thing that's important to me, because the stuff you've seen, normally people would label that as an experiencer. You've experienced UFOs, you saw them yourself, you've had the Skinwalker, and although experiencer may be more related with the UAP issue, how has doing this job and also your personal experiences, how has that affected your view of reality? How has it affected you emotionally and spiritually?
Well, I think one of the things, you and I had brought up this reference where the human mind, I don't think, is capable of grasping the vastness of our universe. I don't I don't think that will ever happen, not in our lifetimes as a human race. It's simply beyond comprehension. I had mentioned, you know, a concept that I'd come up with, that if you were standing on one of these beaches in South America where you have 75 miles beach that way and 75 miles beach, sand beach this way, and you were in the middle and you reached down and grabbed a handful of sand and you brushed away all the sand except one single little grain in the palm of your hand, that would represent the earth theoretically within the universe, how vast our universe is. We just cannot grasp that. The possibility of there being other life forms within the universe is very likely in my view, and I think we are experiencing those things even to this very day. I mean, we've recently had people within the last 10 or so years with the military that have had overt experiences encountering objects, anomalous objects that simply couldn't be explained away, as weather phenomenon or some type of terrestrial phenomenon. I think those experiences throughout the world, I really think you would be hard pressed. John and I have traveled to places like Scotland and talked to people, and they have very similar experiences with all of these phenomena like we do over here. And so no matter where you go, I just got back from Canada, and so the people have those experiences there. But I think it's an internationally, and I think not only current but going back hundreds of years, you'd be hard pressed to find a single family that doesn't have a family member that has not had some sort of supernatural experience, either, with a Bigfoot, seeing a Bigfoot, or seeing a UFO, or all of these different types of phenomena, shapeshifters, or I think it's more common than it is, rare.
That's a good segue to my next question, because it's one thing to experience it yourself,
Very
and it's
much.
another thing to go as a law enforcement officer and have to try to record it and document it. And that is a huge challenge when it's a mostly anecdotal evidence. If it's your anecdotal evidence, if it's your story, then it's real. You experienced it, but being able to prove that's another thing. And I think we talked about this earlier. I think if you're an experiencer, you finally get to the point where you don't feel like you have to prove it anymore. It's like you can't spend your whole life trying to convince people of something that is real, when most of the time they won't believe some of it, at least until they experience it. And so how do you officially document and validate paranormal or UFO cases as a ranger? How did you do that?
Well, I think typically in a law enforcement investigation, you're building that case to be able to take to a prosecutor so he can develop the case further, so that you're presenting this in court. It's critical you have tangible evidence that can hold up in court. And I think when it came to investigating paranormal phenomenon, a lot of times it wasn't the focus wasn't the apex of that investigation wasn't the collection of the evidence to say, oh yes, here's the proof that this stuff exists. And it was the focus was that majority of people that had these experiences were traumatized, and they needed more or less someone to listen to what it is they were experiencing, whether this was a 10-year-old child or 80-year-old person. They were needing someone to talk to that would listen to them, not assume that they're crazy or on drugs or drinking or those kind of things. Again, going back to the chief ranger at that time, he was adamant that we were going to listen to people. We were going to listen to their concerns, and that was the focus. That was the primary responsibility and function, I think, of these investigations. It wasn't to cast a Bigfoot track or photograph the hair, collect the hair and send it off to the labs, which we did. But that
would you bring Muon in to help out with that part of it then? Because that tends to be more the line of what Muon does in their investigations. They go for the material things of it. So did Muon ever get involved, or is that completely separate?
No, they we did reach out to Muon at times. The thing you have to consider with the Navajo Nation is that it's a sovereign nation. It's like a nation within a nation. Uh-huh. It's like the equivalent of you having Mexico right in the center of the heart of the Navajo or the United States, and
or like the Vatican.
Sovereign nation. And outside entities, you're on Navajo land when you're there, and
you have to be invited, right?
Yeah, and the Navajo Nation could in theory ask those peoples that aren't tribal members to leave. I mean, even entities like the FBI have working relationships with the Navajo government and tribal government to come in and assist with various investigations like homicide and things of that nature. And
so if they were invited by the Navajo Rangers to come in, and the family or the people who experienced something wanted them to come in and do the investigation, would that get them in, or would there still be some roadblocks that they might have to overcome?
Typically, in the cases we were involved in, our department would have to be the requesting organization for those entities that are outside, like MUFON or others, Bigalow, Bigelow's group, which we did have assistance in some of the investigations with these groups. But it was also where there was a partnership and working together.
Well, next question I have is, how do traditional Navajo beliefs integrate or clash with modern ideas of aliens, extraterrestrials, or interdimensional beings? Really, the question I'm asking is, are these new phenomenon that we're seeing, are they actually ancient? It's not really new. It's just now people are either paying attention to it, or we've got the technology to be able to pick it up or to spot it, to be able to see it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think with a lot of the Navajo people and especially the older Navajos, there is that understanding that there are, you know, the references to star people that's very common and you hear with indigenous peoples. It is taught within the culture that there are these entities that are coming here to Earth for whatever reasons, to impart knowledge of how we should be living our lives and things of that nature. In more recent years, you've heard this idea, especially among UFO organizations, about government disclosure. And with many Native peoples, they're not sitting around waiting for our government to disclose to us that there are these entities out there. These tribes and peoples, indigenous peoples, have known for hundreds, if not thousands of years, that we're not alone in the universe. We're not, man isn't, just like you said earlier, the apex of the universe. So,
I have a question for you. I can't think of the name. Maybe you'll know it, but it was a series on Netflix. It wasn't the Dark Skies alien one, but it was on a Navajo reservation, and there were Navajo police officers. Do you happen to have seen that
um,
series? Dark.
yeah, it was the Navajo Cops series
Yep,
of
exactly. And the one
television.
guy was an FBI agent who came in undercover. And but anyway, I love the show. But the reason I asked that is because you've seen a lot of things as a Navajo Ranger, and you also have your cultural upbringing. And in that series, the sheriff would have like what looked like some kind of medicine bag with him, that he would, whenever there was something paranormal, whether it be witches or whatever, witchcraft being involved, he would have that. Do you ever, before or after you get involved with the paranormal investigation, are there any ceremonial practices that you might undertake to help protect yourself?
Within the Navajo culture, there are traditional practices that are used, for self-protection.
Right.
Uh, John and I think that there was a unique situation where John and I, and even our chief, for me, I grew up between two worlds. I grew up between the world. I grew up in Oklahoma, going to public school and learning everything, the curriculum within the public school. There were a few Native Americans within the school system, but let's say in a class of 30 students, there might have been 5 Native Americans of different tribes, but it was predominantly a non-Native situation with the schools. And so I grew up between that, learning, your biology and science and mathematics and all of those kind of courses and curriculum. Not to say that that's not taught on the Navajo Nation, but within the Navajo Nation, there was it's the people living there are steeped within the culture. A lot of the, I mentioned taboos. A lot of the Navajos living within that culture, you avoid things related to death. Excuse me, you avoid those things related to witchcraft, and those are things that are left to the medicine men that can deal with those kind of things. So me and John, John grew up between Los Angeles and staying with his grandparents, Navajo grandparents, in the summertime. And my chief at the time, he was born on the reservation, full blood Navajo, but he was also taken to the Mormon school system up in Salt Lake City, in that region, and he went through the Mormon schools. So we were, all three of us were allowed to see this phenomenon and these things from two different perspectives. I think it allowed us to do the job in dealing with these kind of phenomenon, where John and I had experiences with some of the other Navajo Rangers that did not want anything to do with any of these kind of phenomena and would avoid it at all costs. And I think that was a unique situation. So
I think you told me that this stuff didn't scare you. I mean, you respected it. You realized that some aspects of it were evil, but this wasn't something that scared you, because it's kind of hard to do your job if you're scared, if you're terrified, correct?
I think that goes back to my individual spirituality. As a child growing up in Oklahoma, I had a very strong sense of spirituality and connection to my creator. At times I probably drove my mother crazy, where as a little 8 or 9 year old, I'm out in the woods and she's hollering after dark, for me to come in because it was dark, and I'd be still playing out there, unafraid of what was out there. But I've always had that sense, and John also has that sense too. Strong spirituality, strong connection to the Creator, and that was something that transcended. I mean, John and I worked SWAT, and at times we were being shot at, and you didn't hold that fear. You focused on your training, your law enforcement techniques and tactical operations to get you through those missions, and focus on the objective to get you through, putting your safety and your life in the hands of the Creator. And so essentially that was the approach with some of the paranormal haunting cases. I had 12-inch butcher knife that flew out of a butcher block, flew about 8 foot in front of me and the homeowner, and went right through a grapefruit about 2 feet in front of us. And of course the homeowner was quite shocked, but I didn't give in to the fear, with this phenomenon. And so at times, yeah, you had to stand your ground. And so
It's the ultimate poltergeist.
oh yeah,
Worst kind. I
yeah,
assume if he was really trying to kill you, it
yeah,
possibly would have hit you. But I think
right.
that what I was going to say was, you guys, Navajo Nation people, you have a different view of death than most non-native people, correct? This isn't something to be afraid of. I think you said something earlier when we talked. It was something that you guys celebrate, correct?
Well, I think that is more of a concept, an idea between myself and John Dover and my chief, not
Not a nationwide thing.
necessarily an attribute of the Navajo people. I think those individuals that are strong in their faith, have a similar view. But you have the cultures like the Mexican culture that celebrate, a person's passing and celebrate that person's life and their achievements, and and it's a life celebration, as opposed to this idea of death and crying and mourning. And I think there's culturally, and you may see that among different cultures around the globe, but there's a different approach to that. And John and I didn't, but it was because of our existing faith that we tend to put our safety and all the woo woo kind of things into the hands of the Creator, and not show these things fear. There were cases like the incident with the 12-inch butcher knife, where whatever source of energy there, phenomenon, it did try to elicit a fear response,
Reaction.
which we weren't going to give it that.
Right, right. We're going to let it feed off of that. I have a question, because you obviously investigated these cases. Some of these people must have been really shook up, and maybe it's a little bit different than what I'm thinking, but I want to ask the question is, for those that didn't necessarily buy into, I'm talking about Navajo people here, or people that you went out and investigated, that maybe they're UFO, or maybe it was an abduction story, maybe it was just contact, but I'm sure there had to be some of them where it kind of was shattering to their understanding of reality. And I want to preface this, though. This is a weakness in our community, in a sense that we don't really have the resources to help people who've been who got PTSD from their experiences. We just call them experiencers. In fact, a friend of mine named Ann created a chart, and it's got an A, a B, and a C section in it. The first section is A. That's where experiencers normally turn to. They turn to their friends, they turn to their family, they turn to their doctor, they turn to their pastor, their rabbi, or whatever. But the problem with group A is no one in that group knows what to do. Some of them don't believe it, and they get victimized the second time because they make fun of them or whatever. And that's more my culture than yours. But then you have the second group, where those who want to exploit the experiencer. And so they want to use the person to advance themselves. And they're not really concerned about the person and what they've gone through. What they're concerned about is the story. And so there's a lot of trauma that's unresolved. And then, of course, group C is the group where there are gatherings of experiencers. And I have an experiencer group myself of about 12 people. And we're there to be able to help each other if we have, some kind of trauma or something, or if someone's dealing with something, or, sometimes this stuff is overwhelming. I mean, it's like living in the Twilight Zone at times, especially when it's a lot going on in a short amount of time. And so when you encountered that, what was your plan of action to try to stabilize that person and try to help that person? What was there anything set up within the structure of the Navajo Nation, or was that an individual thing, or were there any groups or anything like that to help experiencers who maybe were traumatized by their experience?
Well, for John and I, at no time were we were never putting ourselves out there as medicine men or any type of shamanic type of individuals. We were there to investigate these cases, to listen, and to try to determine if there was something of a supernatural or paranormal nature going on versus something naturally occurring. I mean, radon vents and very common out here, where this off-gassing is creating phenomenon, and where it could be interpreted as a haunting experience, high levels of EMF making people sick and that kind of thing. But until you actually got boots on the ground and could use the equipment to try to determine what that was, you simply didn't know. And so that was our job. We would turn a lot of times to medicine men, and we still do to this very day, the various phenomena that we experience, and for protections and things of that nature, shaman from other tribes, but we've learned to protect ourselves and know, in a lot of ways how to create that protection going into an investigation, whatever. But a lot of times it was, again, what you had mentioned earlier, it was this individual, especially for the first time experience, they were traumatized by it, and they were needing somebody to listen. A lot of times that was our mission, was to listen to what it is they were experiencing.
That seems like part of law enforcement. I mean, obviously you can be busy, but at the very least, and maybe it's the shaman, maybe it's somebody like that, but to me it would just be it would be very hard to be able to just leave somebody in that state without trying to provide them some kind of assistance, even if it's an ear to listen to, or if it's, like I said, under your culture, to maybe, reference them to a shaman, refer them to a shaman or something like that, instead of just leaving them in that shell shock state.
Right.
So
Well, that was for us. That was never an option in these cases to simply go in and take the information that was conveyed and leave them standing there.
right.
There, in a lot of these cases, there was repeated visits
Well,
uh, to that family and to that individual that was experiencing, to let them know that we were there for them and we were concerned about their well-being.
that's
And
community policing, right?
right, exactly. And that was a big part of the Navajo Ranger philosophies. Matter of fact, the Navajo Rangers at a certain point were receiving funding from the community oriented policing grants under the federal government to do that work. So yeah, I mean, you were trained in being a part of the community and listening to the concerns, and so that was just kind of for John and I, and we adapted those philosophies over in doing the work with the paranormal.
Well, I'm sure that you've already addressed this probably multiple times, but for my audience, what do you do about skeptics who try to dismiss your work as fantasy or folklore?
For John and I, we don't really focus in on that part of it. John and I did this work. We didn't volunteer to do the work. We were assigned and we did the work, and we simply let that work speak for itself. We're not trying to sell an idea or belief to people, especially when it comes to the supernatural or paranormal. All we can convey is what we experienced and witnessed in these cases. And with, I don't know if throughout the career of doing all of these different types of phenomena, if it made us or allowed us to be in a place where we're going to experience more of those phenomena. I mean, I've experienced, earlier you mentioned the Bigfoot. I've witnessed that. I've
Okay.
witnessed the UFO. I've witnessed the extraterrestrial phenomenon, the ET phenomenon, and haunting phenomenon. All of these different things over the course of my career. It's not that I went out necessarily to prove to myself that this existed. It was in that space that I operated within, and I was. I look at it as a blessing as opposed to some type of curse. I would much rather go through my life knowing that these phenomena do exist in and how I treat other people related to these phenomena, as opposed to going through my life with blinders on and pretending, oh, that was just the wind blowing and that was just the house settling and that kind of thing. I know in my reality that these things do happen. I can't always explain it. 9 times out of 10, I can't explain what's going on, but it does happen. And we should treat those people that have these experiences
What if you had a
simply with the golden rule. Treat
right? That's
treat
good.
people
That's good.
how you want to be treated. If it
Right.
was you in their shoes experiencing this, how would you want to be treated?
Yeah. I was thinking when I said skeptic, I was thinking of not like a debunker, not like somebody who's trying to prove you wrong, but somebody who's just hasn't had enough evidence yet. They kind of like Mulder. They want to believe,
Right.
but let's say it's a sincere person that's not looking to prove you wrong, but just they don't understand the subject. What would you tell somebody like that? That they're open, but they're skeptical. Is that's not like converting because they're actually asking, to help understand it. What would you tell somebody like that?
You said a key word. You mentioned from the X Files. I want to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And for John and I, it was about collecting evidence. It was about documenting. It was about photographing and collecting evidence and compiling that information into a report and letting the report stand on its own. And it wasn't it's not about belief. Belief entails having faith in something that there is no solid, tangible evidence for it, and that wasn't where we were at, and still isn't. And we're not trying to prove to ourselves that these phenomena exist, which a lot of the various paranormal Bigfoot hunters and ghost hunters and stuff like that, yeah, they're out there with this stuff until it slaps them in the face and they know it's real.
Right.
There's no mistaking the phenomenon. They know that it does happen, and for whatever reason. And
Yeah.
so
But maybe if you had somebody like that, you could share a case and say, oh, this is an example of something this is actual evidence I came across. Would that be something that you wouldn't be comfortable doing, or would that be something you would naturally, if somebody came up to you and said, okay, I'm really interested in this. Do you have any stories that because it kind of in a way, that's what we're doing now. We're sharing your experiences, and then people can make their own decisions based on that. Correct?
John and I, again, you had mentioned television production series Secret of Skinwalker Ranch
Mhm.
and Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, and John's on Ancient Aliens, and
Right.
we've been on Netflix's program on Netflix, Unsolved Mysteries, and so we have been in association with those productions, but also with those television productions, we made it very clear that we're not going to be out there fabricating things or making up things that didn't happen, and you know, and essentially letting what we've experienced stand for itself, and so we don't we're not out there to try to take people out to show them that these phenomena exist. Yes, we do conduct investigations at times into these various cases, but a lot of times, again, it goes back to that root where you're trying to help somebody that's having a repeated experience that is disruptive to their life, and they're needing help essentially, and
Right.
so.
Let's move on to the next question. Then I want to get your opinion on this. Do you think there is an organized suppression or cover up related to UFOs and the paranormal?
To me, without a doubt. I mean, when you go back and you look at cases like the Roswell incident, Corona incident, and these other historical events, you can see clear evidence that there was a suppression of the facts and the experiences that people had within those cases. Not only with those particular incidents, with a lot of different incidents and cases over the years where it's kind of a common sense kind of thing where we know that our governments recognize that these phenomena exist. We see that in the congressional hearings and things like that today. There is, and I mean, John and I have witnessed these so-called men in black out on the reservation at times in and around some of these incidents, major incidents involving UFOs or UAPs, and so it's there. But so I think there is an effort to try to control, or just like this idea of Area 51, S4, and what has been conveyed about those facilities over the years. Very credible people giving their testimony and what they experience and what they've seen, and so I think it's there. I think there isn't, not only within the United States, but other superpowers and countries. There there is the effort to try to glean or possess, those technologies that are beyond what we are aware of here on within our known physics and science, and for whatever purpose. So yeah.
That's actually a really good segue to the next question as well. And that is, have you ever been warned off a case? You mentioned Men in Black, or felt watched or obstructed during your investigations?
John and I, having been federal firearms instructors We trained at places like Gunsight, which is a premier firearms training academy that has SWAT teams from all over the country, SWAT team operators, special operations like Navy SEALs and Delta and these kind of highest level special operators. John and I worked side by side with them, and we've bunked with those guys at the end of the day and had shared a beer, at the end of the day with these types, and we have trained to the nth degree using those special weapons too, and we're not, even to this day, we're not afraid of those elements out there that might have an overt threat, to us. For us, we were going to do our job that we were assigned to do. Again, fortunately, we were part of a sovereign nation, so we did have the authority to protect the Navajo Nation and its properties and interests and the government and its people. So, and we were going to do that regardless of,
So
what
you didn't
threats were going to come down the line.
So you didn't have to worry about the federal government coming in and, if there's a crash site or something like that, coming in and covering it up because of you being a sovereign nation.
I know there was a presence there at different times during some of these events, but there was never, to my knowledge, within the period time frame that John and I worked, there was never any clashes between those organizations and our department and the three-letter, organizations out there that wanted to try to control. Now, I've heard stories of these entities coming in and being present during some of these things, but I never witnessed that.
What about the men in black you mentioned? What do you think their purpose was? They almost had to be one of those three-letter agencies because they're, average non-native person doesn't have that kind of freedom or access, correct?
You have to realize that even among those black operation organizations, black budget organizations, one, funding isn't an issue, equipment is not an issue, operators are not an issue because they can afford to hire the highest trained personnel. But a lot of those organizations are very compartmentalized. You'd have a section that is performing a certain function and have a certain mission, and have a sister department or section that has no idea what that agency's or that program's or section is doing, so it's very compartmentalized with a lot of these. John and I worked hand in hand with some of Bigelow's operators, and those guys come from that background where they were special operators coming from maybe SEALs or these three-letter agencies, And
did you ever feel watched when you were doing any of these investigations, monitored, whatever? Or
I
since
did
then?
numerous times, but in that instance, you don't know if that's a supernatural entity that's watching, or if that's a government entity that's watching, or some type of subcontracted organization that's watching. You don't know. There's so much. It's just like, and I know we were on a call earlier today, and it was actively interrupted by some source.
Mm-hmm.
It was. I mean,
Yeah.
that wasn't normal, but what is the nature of that? Is that a Men in Black organization that's doing that? Is that the government? Is that an supernatural extraterrestrial thing? It's really explored that and investigated that to the nth degree. I think organizations like, going back to like Robert Bigelow's group that had purchased Skinwalker Ranch, and then again the current organization that owns that property. They're trying to nail down a lot of that, but it's like grasping at straws. You just, I mean, with a lot of it, I mean, they have, I mean, you have a billionaire that's funding that budget for that. Yet, even in doing that, you can't. Well, in a lot of situations, you can't label it. You can't back it into a corner. You can't put it in a neat little box. It's beyond that.
The frustration thing about Bigalow is that with the Bass contract, he got like $12 million of taxpayer money.
21 million.
Was it 21? Last I heard it was like 12. But anyway, and we got nothing to show for it. Absolutely.
Well, that you have to realize that ATIP and all of those other programs that ended up under federal funding, when the federal government holds the purse strings, they also hold the authority to tell you to shut up, that it didn't happen. And so with Robert Bigalow, he's Robert Bigelow is very, very curious and interested in all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But if Uncle Sam gave you money and told you to shut up about it, you're going to shut up about it unless you want these men in black paying you a visit, knocking on your door.
No, plus he has all the contracts. He could, it's like what's going on in the news right now. And I'm not being political here, but there's this battle between Musk and Trump's threatening to pull the contracts from him. And so I'm just drawing a parallel. I'm not picking sides on this one, but they could go after Bigalow that way too.
Unfortunately, politics gets its little grubby fingers into all of it. I mean,
I try to stay away from it. I'll be honest, especially in this community. We all have our own personal views, but I don't think that politics helps the community at all. I think all it does is divide us. And so when I say something, I very well clarify, I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. I'm a researcher. I'm a podcaster, and all I want is the truth at the end of the day. And I'm not backing one party or the other party,
Unfortunately, these organizations, like with, I had been assigned to work the Northridge earthquake in California as a manager of 3 of the shelters, and I seen how politics gets involved.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not dismissing that. I agree.
Yeah.
It can make a big difference. You
see those divisions even when it comes to the paranormal and supernatural and UFOs and all of this stuff. I recently, I traveled to McMinnville and the McMiniman's UFO Festival recently. And with some of those organizations and events like that, you're either UFO or you're Bigfoot or you're paranormal or haunting, or, you're in these clearly defined genres of investigation. And for John and I, we had no choice. When the dispatcher called us up and said, I've got this case, and we responded. And it wasn't like we had a choice in what it is we were investigating. That was the unique thing about conducting all of these investigations and allowing us to see the spectrum of different phenomenon and the commonality, how dimensions came into play with all of these phenomena, the common thread among all of them. And so
you think they're connected then?
Yeah. We didn't
I'm finding it though, even with my podcast, it all started off, one direction. I had a little bit of remote viewing, one video I created in there, but as I go on, now we're talking about near-death experience. Now we're talking about skinwalkers and stuff. So I'm agreeing with you. I think that, the Secret Skinwalker Ranch show us that all these things seem to be going on at the same time. And to be honest with you, all these things are going on in my life at the same time. And sometimes it's hard to delineate one from the other. And you don't know whether what's touching your back in your bedroom is a ghost, a spirit, or if it's interdimensional or what it is. The lines blur quite a bit. I have one more question, and then we will be done. And that is, I want to leave with this question before I do the closing, is looking back, what case still haunts you or feels unresolved to you?
There was a case in 2009 that I did. It was a haunting case. There was an office space where the workers were reporting different kinds of phenomenon going on within that 3-level structure. The director came to the chief ranger and said, my staff are experiencing what they claim to be, all kinds of different phenomenon. Do you have anybody that can come in and take a look and validate that there's something there? There's something going on. And so I was assigned, and I had put together a team of 4 individuals. One guy was from Dallas area, paranormal investigator. Another guy was fairly local, a specialist with audio visual equipment and recording and everything related to that. And then there was a guy that actually worked in that facility that was willing to be the key man. He had this huge ring of keys for that facility, looked like a jailer. He was very spiritual. He was Christian oriented and had a strong faith, but he was also curious with these phenomena. So he wanted to be a part, and I was okay with that. And myself, so there was four of us. John was not a part of this particular case. I did at times talk to John about some of the phenomenon and stuff, but 2 days I had selected in and around a holiday where there was no staff or people around. We went in, I think it was on a Friday. So we go in, I arrived there with the key guy about 8 o'clock in the evening. It had got dark, and he opened it up, and I did a walkthrough of the facility and to try to get an idea of how to approach that investigation and to get familiar with the layout. And there was a large conference room table downstairs of that facility, and at one point the key guy was upstairs in the main section of the building where the office cubicles were, primary office cubicles. I was standing there in the basement part of that lower facility, and they're leaning against this conference room table with my arms and just standing there leaning there. And as I was, all of a sudden, it was as though somebody pressed their finger against my upper lip and moved it from one side to the other, and then paused and then went back. This took a few seconds for that to happen. And then over to my left side, there was a conversation between 2 male individuals. There was nobody standing there, but within 2 feet or 3 feet of me, there was a conversation being carried out. And I couldn't really make out what was being said. But it was, it was clear that a conversation was going on. So at that point, for me, I knew that in some respect, there was phenomenon going on within that space. The other investigators arrived by 9:00 p.m. and I briefed them almost immediately. In that conference room table, we set up laptops and various equipment to record atmospheric data and all kinds of things, night vision equipment and thermal equipment and stuff. And so we start out leaving that room and going into the next room. Almost immediately, there was a phenomenon where it's referred to as a port. So you have a physical object that appears out of nothingness, out of empty space. And in this instance, it was coins. So there was a coin, a quarter that fell in the floor. But for me, I was very skeptical and suspicious of this. And we went back into that room with the conference room table, and I had everybody empty out their pockets to make sure there was nobody with pockets full of coins, and which they weren't, but I had to be sure of that. And we went back in that room, and again, almost immediately a coin falls, and it's documented, photographed, and so for the 2 days there was a total of 66 coins, and these coins would come flying across the room, sometimes from a height of maybe 15 feet, at the corner of a room. Sometimes they would hit us, sometimes they would fly. I think the furthest was about 35 or 40 feet that one of the coins flew. All U.S. coins, nickels, pennies, dimes, and quarters. One of the unique features about the coins was that they would behave like any other coin you'd flip out of your pocket and land on. That basement floor was poured concrete, and it was, it had a surface treatment to it, but it was basically poured concrete. So when a coin would hit that, you could hear it from a long ways away, and especially if it's, if nobody's making any noise. Mm-hmm. So we would be able to hear these and focus in on where it fell and take photographs and video or whatever and collect the coin. But they would all land heads up.
Oh, so wow.
They would hit and make a big arc and spiral in, come in, and then spin and fall over. But out of all the 66 coins, they would all land heads up. And and I know out of what we learned in school with statistics and probability, that's not possible in a natural setting.
Exactly.
That can't be recreated just naturally. I mean, it's not going to happen that way. There was a higher number of the Lincoln wheat sit pennies, the ones with the little wheat things on the back, the Lincoln pennies. There was like 7 or 8 of those, I think. But again, heads up, and those were collected. But in and following that particular incident, an investigation, me and the guy from Dallas, he was staying here with me at my residence. And matter of fact, I was sitting exactly where I am right now at this moment. And he was sitting over to this side. We were looking at our laptops, going through all kinds of information collected for those 2 days, video and pictures and all kinds of stuff. And as I was sitting there, behind me, there was a quarter that fell in my floor, in the kitchen floor. And I looked up at him and he looked at me, and we knew that there had been an attachment, that there was something present there. So he jumped up and grabbed a digital SLR and took a picture of the coin, and he was taking pictures around my residence. And he had gone into my bedroom, past the living room, and was taking pictures. I'd gone into the living room, and I was sitting on the couch there I think I was messing with a camera or something. And just as he walked out of my bedroom, the threshold of my bedroom, I had just looked up at him, and 5 coins rained down over the top of his head, between his head and the ceiling. And I witnessed that. And so these coins fell in the floor, and his eyes were big, and we took photos.
They literally came out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. I seen it,
I told you.
Going back to that investigation, I witnessed at least 10 times where these coins fell out of thin air. You're right in front of my eyes. There's nothing in that space. There's nobody standing right there. It materialized out of nothingness and fell on the floor. And I witnessed that at least 10 times during the 66 original coins. That experience, seeing that, it really opened up, like you had mentioned earlier, some of these phenomena where it really opens up your view of our life here on this little planet and the universe. It cemented this idea of other dimensions, because with the coins, they're coming into our physical world. You and I are sitting in right now from some other place. They're originating from point A and coming to point B into on the floor, where we're at. But where the point A is, who knows where that is?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Who knows where it is? It could be within the space. I don't necessarily think that. In that, I did have there was one coin where it was a Taiwanese coin, the only non-US coin, that it fell on my kitchen cabinet counter right here. I didn't have that kind of coins on, where I live, but it was a Taiwanese coin, and today that phenomenon still happens. I can be anywhere. And I'm not in the mind frame of anything paranormal. I might be traveling. I might be, and the phenomenon happens out of the blue. But I can be in Canada. I can be in Los Angeles. I can be in Scotland. The phenomenon can happen anywhere. But for me, me and John and others analyzed the coins and looked at the coins from all angles. I mean, looking at the metallurgy, what is the coin made up of, and from year to year, how is the difference between the coins makeup, between a quarter and a penny, and all of those different denominations. But I've come to the realization, for me, in my reality, I think it's spirit that is familiar with me, that knows me, and these coins serve as a message to me that simply, heads up, I'm here, I'm present, I'm in your space. And with indigenous peoples and native peoples, a lot of times you have what is known as spirit animals that'll convey messages. A lot of times people say hawks and eagles and other animals, wolves, and convey these messages, owls, and it's different from culture to culture, but I think the coins are similar to that. It's a spirit that is maybe one of my past loved ones that knows me, and in the situation of the haunting case, I don't think that was already present there, the coins. I think it served because there was elements that were demonic, that were evil in witchcraft with that particular case. And I think whatever this entity was with the coins was serving to say, be careful, you're venturing into something that can be hazardous or dangerous when it comes to these kind of things. And so today, that's how I view it. And it happens, it can happen here in my house. I have a whole large gallon Ziploc bag full of those coins today.
Oh, you saved them. Cool.
And bag it and tag it. I have these little snack size Ziploc bags. I'll use a permanent Sharpie marker and date and time it, how it fell, what the mechanics were in and around when it appeared. And it is what it is. I don't know, but it happens. I've seen it.
Well, I think it's interesting because we talked about this, and I'll close the podcast out. But this is the second time I've heard of this. And the first time I heard of it, I thought it was a little odd. I didn't dismiss it or anything, but I had never heard of it before. Now that I've heard it from you too, the first time it was from Margie K of the Unex Network. And like I said, it isn't that I didn't believe her. I just had never heard of it before. Right. And so when you hear about something again, and then I'm sure as time goes on, as I investigate more into the ghost event, I've had several of my own, but to hear it a second time, I mean, that really makes your ears perk up, and you go, this is not an isolated incident. This is something that happens more often than most people know.
Very common in a lot of haunting cases. You'll hear references to pennies from heaven, and things like that. And
that was Margie Case, and that's because Ginger Rogers was the ghost. Yeah. And she was going to sell some extras she had of some things that belonged to Ginger Rogers because he had extras. Yeah. And that was Ginger Rogers' way of sending a bunch of pennies from heaven to let her know, don't sell my stuff.
Yeah. Well, so, it's very common. The apport, that term comes from that time in the spiritualist movement in this country and other countries in the late 1800s and 1900s, really coming out of the Civil War, where there was a mass loss of life in this country and very traumatic and sudden loss of life. And people wanted to try to communicate with their lost loved ones. And so the apports, the coins appearing and things appearing, that term apport, came out of that time frame, and the time of this talking boards and spirit boards, and that movement, but yeah, it's very common.
Wow. Well, Stanley, it has been an honor to have you on the podcast. I can't wait to get your partner John and Michelle to come on. This is going to be a phenomenal podcast. I'll probably format it a little bit differently because there'll be 3 guests, but I can't wait. I mean, you really have. I mean, today you've taught us so much, especially what it's like to be a Navajo Ranger, not just a Navajo Ranger, but the paranormal ranger.
Right.
I'll have to say this as well, though. I'm sure I will be seeing skinwalkers in my sleep. Your encounter with a skinwalker was incredible, and the best part is, Stanley, you lived to tell the story.
Right.
Stanley, you have an open invitation, like I said, to come back on. We can talk about that when this podcast is over.
Sure.
But I'll go ahead and turn to the audience right now, and I want to thank you guys for watching the podcast. If you like the channel, and I sure hope you do, I'd really ask that you go ahead and share this video. If you haven't done it already, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel. It's a kind of up and coming channel. We've been here for a little bit over a year. We've had incredible guests. So make sure you go and check it out. And look, I'm Steve Bassett, Matt Laszlo, Mario Woods, Brett Elders, Dr. Lynn Kitai. I mean, the list, Darcy Weir, the list just goes on and on. Stanley Milford Jr., the Paranormal Ranger. And so if you haven't done that, go ahead and do that. And so I just want to thank you for watching the podcast. Until the next time, I want to say good night and God bless.
This is the future.